Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode. This is our 723 episode. We will discuss on agribusiness innovations. I just want to share a good news with all of you. World Talent Economy Forum yesterday we organized uh, B Lab in Bangladesh. It will be B Lab Dhaka. Uh, 750 Japanese corporations, all of the Japanese corporations, they are supporting World Talent Economy Forums, and we are developing our business lab. So a lot of research innovations we will get from Japanese corporations, and we will integrate it through our ecosystem. And already you know that World Talent Economy Forums, we are developing 2 million people ecosystem. It's a test and trial basis work. We want to invite more entrepreneurs and scientists and innovators in our team. So hopefully this dialogue can uplift millions of people in South Asia. We have our world famous speaker, Professor David Smith. We have our world famous politician. Already he's very popular in South Asia, Dr. Talib Rafael. We have our very good friend, world famous speaker, Professor Rob, and a great innovator, Dr. Professor David J. Kelly. First, I would like to give chance Professor David Smith.
Sharif, thank you so much. This topic is one that is going through so many changes, and we see how important it is to the world today, is particularly in light of disruptions we have with the war in Ukraine and the logistic meltdown from that and COVID and other things like that. That is just there. And, I'm anxious to also hear what Rob has to say later, since he grew up on a farm and has that unique insight. My family had one, but we only went out there on the weekends and had people who lived on it. So this is one that is there. But, if you look in the agriculture section, technology advancements in this sector have really looked at how to meet the demand for farm modernization. We're seeing the same type of advancements there as we see in autonomous cars going further. Digitalization has really begun to move quite a bit into the agriculture area, and sustainability and looking at the environmental impacts and things have become more and more important around the world as you look at this with the agribusiness innovation. Smart farming is beginning to be a concept that employs technologies like Internet of Things, computer vision, AI, a lot of other types of sensors, going and using cloud-based tools for looking at weather and weather trends, doing soil analysis and other things. You're also beginning to see robotics and drones beginning to be used quite a bit in farming by replacing manual farm operations such as picking fruit, killing weeds, spraying waters, and others. And that the imaging from not only drones but satellites as well, coupled with the GPS systems out there, provide a high resolution view of what's happening in the field, not just what is happening, but it's guiding the automation that's being done to do very precise farming using not only the traditional tractors and other things like that, but these new, more automated ones. And, the IoT technology is allowing powered sensors to collect real-time field data that allows farmers to make data-driven decisions. And I've always, as I work with companies and other things, you really want to go to data-driven decisions as much as you can. And in addition, the widespread adoption of something called precise agriculture and the growing trend of indoor farming has fueled this Internet of Things growth in farming. And it's going to be really pretty disruptive. So the focus is not only to improve the overall quantity of crops and the quality of the crops and enhance the livestock management, but it's also to create a sustainable future. And there's a lot of trends, there's a lot of things going together on it. And we're going to continue to see that going further. But Internet of Things, robotics, artificial intelligence, drones, precision agriculture, uh, agribiotech, which is really beginning to become very interesting, big data, and the analytics that go with it, the ability to do controlled environments, particularly as we're seeing more and more indoor farming. But the connective technology we've talked about, how everything's become connected, but also something called regenerative agriculture. In regenerative agriculture, with all the advances in digitalization and sensors and technology, is beginning to go back and say, how can we repair the damage we've done in the past on the land and the environment, and how can we position it for the future and be more productive at feeding the masses? I can keep on going, but let me stop there because that gets us into the topic, and I'd love to hear more of what's said by others.
Thank you, Professor David Smith. Dr. Talib Rafael, I have a specific question for you because every day I have to face a lot of people question about you. How Bangladesh and Jordan can work together for agribusiness innovations? This is number one. And number two, what is your advice for the youth generations? How they become become a successful policymakers or politicians? So I think we have many interesting audience from different university. They may listen to your voice.
Okay, let me start with the first question first, which is how can Jordan and Bangladesh work together? I think they can work together very well because agriculture is in common between them. Now, agriculture is as old as man is, and it's an old tradition. And we were the breadbasket of the world during the Roman Empire. Now we're not anymore because we have drifted away from that. I think urbanization is a problem because urban people are not agricultural people. But now with agriculture being affected by the new technologies, it's becoming easier to become a farmer and to adjust to that. So my advice to young people is please take care of agriculture because with food sustainability, food structure, sufficiency, we can become more independent. And that's a very important factor in the world, developing world today. How to become more independent. That's something that is very important to us. And I also would like to add my voice to David. I'd like to hear what Rob and the other participants are saying about this and then intervene again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Rob. What you want to add for agribusiness?
Well, agribusiness is an interesting topic. It is probably one of the pillars of allowing a society or a country to flourish and maintain its population. I remember back decades ago, back when Bill Gates was running Microsoft, he had a meeting, and in the meeting, the companies were all talking about how they wanted to sell technology to the developing world, and Gates said, a lot of these countries, they don't have clean water, they don't have sufficient food, they don't have medicine. And until those problems are solved, we're not going to sell them much of anything. I mean, you have to take care of those priorities first before you can open the market up to make revenue out of them. So dropping into some of these countries and trying to convince them to buy your technology is undoubtedly going to fail because they're having trouble just feeding their folks. And so that was one of the epiphanies that eventually led him to resign from Microsoft and go into full-time philanthropy to try to address some of those underlying problems. And it's that realization that really should found much of what we do in the technical world is are we making sure that people have the fundamentals? And agribusiness is one of those things. Now, in the United States, one of the big problems with agribusiness is that you can't get people. Often and historically, farms used illegal workers, workers that came across borders illegally and worked the fields because they were very cheap. You didn't have to pay, even though it was illegal to do so, you didn't have to pay taxes, you didn't have to pay benefits, and you could pay below minimum wage to these folks who were very much like indentured servants. The laws have tightened a great deal here with regard to that, and the end result is you just can't get that workforce anymore. And I would certainly argue that practice was not very humane to begin with. Having experienced some of the farms that used to love those folks when I was growing up as a child, as David pointed out, I grew up on a ranch and a farm, ranch during the winters, farm during the summers, and while we did not use that kind of labor, the end result was our labor costs tended to run higher. And as I mentioned, right now, getting domestic labor has become a serious problem. And there's another issue with regard to farming. Much of the work is incredibly boring. The guy I used to work with at IBM, that's how he died. He was driving a tractor, dozed off or wasn't paying attention, and a tree branch picked him up and threw him into the equipment the tractor was dragging. I think he was plowing, and whatever that was just immediately killed him, cut him up into pieces. So not only did he die, but he died ugly. And that happens a lot in farms. The equipment isn't very sophisticated. The safety controls around it has historically not been very advanced, and it wasn't uncommon to see a farm worker that was either partially crippled or had been badly damaged. I know in my own case, when I was around 8 or 9, I was out in shorts and climbing on a piece of equipment, and I took a good chunk of flesh off one of my legs just by touching an exhaust pipe that was improperly shielded, and that was the way it was built. So in the end, the historic equipment was relatively unsafe. The job was relatively boring, and at least on a day-to-day basis, and now you can't get the labor to do it. So that's caused people to really rethink farm equipment, and now going from low technology, it's moving to high technology. As David mentioned, companies like John Deere are bringing out autonomous tractors that will plow fields for you. And if you've ever, I'm guessing almost nobody has ever plowed a field, but it's mind-numbingly boring. You just drive straight, turn, and it wasn't unusual at all for somebody to fall asleep doing that and end up plowed into a tree, or as I said, my old boss cut up in little bitty pieces. Then the other issue, of course, with farming is it can do a great deal of harm. The pesticides and fertilizers tend to get into fresh water supplies and pollute them and can cause deformities in people and animals. And the other part about farming was where we had the farm, people were keeling over at a really high rate from cancer. In fact, my uncle, who was running the farm, he ended up dying looking like he was probably about an 8-year-old when he went. His body just ate itself alive, and he shrunk. Very aggressive form of cancer, and likely because he mishandled pesticides. And those pesticides are horrible if they get into your system, as far as being carcinogenous. And more recent equipment allows for microdosing. So rather than how we typically fertilize, which you just drench everything in fertilizer or pesticide, you put up a pesticide cloud. A more recent equipment allows for more tightly targeted uses of these materials, so you can keep the dosages down and reduce the chance of polluting groundwater and causing things in the area like widespread cancer. What I found particularly interesting, however, about my farm story is people were often thinking the groundwater had been polluted by the pesticides and fertilizers, but water tests continued to come up negative. There was no indication that it was happening, which really had me questioning whether or not those water tests were legitimate or not, because clearly the incidence of cancer was right through the roof in that area. So in the end, as we're applying technology, we're beginning to address some of these problems. The boring parts are increasingly being done by automated equipment. Fertilizer and pesticides are being applied more responsibly, and not entirely yet, but that's the overall trend. And then we've got the one other aspect I haven't mentioned, which is vertical farming. And vertical farming allows you to farm much closer to where the consumer is. So you can put a vertical farm in a city and reduce dramatically your transport costs. And of course, you increase dramatically your square foot yield. And when we're talking about global climate change, The vertical farms tend to be much more able to, depending how the buildings are built, because we just had a bunch of tornadoes come through here, and you had a vertical farm that had been built without precautions against high winds. That vertical farm would be toast in some of those areas now. But as long as you build the vertical farm so that it can survive whatever weather events or earthquake events the region has, then it can sustain even when regular farms don't, because it can survive floods, it can survive earthquakes, it can survive hurricanes if it's been built properly, and the yields are very high, and it can be almost entirely automated. So you get the food closer to the consumer, you can better assure the quality, and you can better assure the sustained effort of the farm using automated methods. So in the end, farming is going from a very low-tech kind of industry to moving to a very high-tech industry very quickly, driven by those multiple problems, trying to limit pollution, trying to deal with a shortage of labor in some areas, and the fact that global climate change is making regular farms and ranches very hard to sustain and carry forward. Oh, and of course, we've got that one other thing that a number of us support, which is moving from consuming animals, living animals, to building or constructing artificial meat so that we can eat that instead, which reduces the production of greenhouse gases. And livestock tends to be very resource intensive, both in terms of water and land use. So in the end, whether we're talking about animal husbandry, farms that raise animals, to farms that raise vegetables and nuts and the rest of it, which is kind of the business that I was in, the farms are becoming much more highly automated and much more focused on optimizing production while reducing labor and production costs and making them far more secure going forward.
Thank you. Professor David J. Caleb, what you want to add for agribusiness innovation?
Well, I think the biggest place for innovation is in really understanding how biological systems work. When we can ideally replicate a full biosphere, I think we're able to really do a lot more with it. But we're still just learning how to do that. So like aquaponics, for example, is an example of these systems where you have like a full nitrite cycle, and you have the potential to, you could stick it up in space and in theory live. And I think when we start talking about innovation and farming, I think these kinds of potentially closed systems help us learn balance. I think, and I think it leads us to a better understanding of how we can optimize for sustainability, really. I think, one of my, I guess, hobbies actually is enclosed biological systems management. I do have a patent having to do with pH control in water chemistry in aquaponics. But I have a number of paludariums, like even in this office here, with that are closed loop systems, where I think it's anyway, that's where I think the biggest innovations are going to be in the application of, well, also machine learning in aquaponic sort of environments.
Thank you. Mr. Paul.
Hello. Hi, from New York. I had a lot of wisdom on here so far. I just got on. Rob and David, wow. You guys know this industry and the concerns and the potential of resolving some of these concerns. In regard to agribusiness, or maybe in regards to human existence on Mother Earth, and subjects of maybe water, which is one of the major things that we're involved with. I add a couple things. Here in New York, we have a very large migrant scenario going on here. And you had mentioned, I think, Rob, about, I think I know our mayor, Mayor Adams, is looking to change the law in government for the country to allow migrants, I think, to work. And maybe this is an area of where migrants who have probably for many years been the workers. Of course, I agree with fair wages and fair everything in life. But based on this, I believe there's a law of which they can't work. Thusly, that's not a good news story. And we are a good news broadcaster. So if something like that can happen, thinking governmentally in the country, that potentially is potentially a win when there's supposedly everybody's got a job nowadays. I hear somebody said that. I don't know who said that, but that everybody's looking for people to work. A lot of job opening signs and all around Manhattan in the city here. But the other thing is, I just wanted to invite you all or let you all know that we're involved with World Water Day, March 22nd, which we many years ago helped one of my associates, Phil Sowers, help create it at the UN, United Nations World Water Day, which is March 22nd. And we'll be doing an event in Times Square here in New York, and then we're going to be doing an Earth Day, a 5-hour live worldwide broadcast with lots of talent and a lot of the peace messengers and others that are concerned about water and our Mother Earth, which is our desire to promote that. And what we're doing is going to corporations that are concerned about ESG, which probably you all are aware of, has now become a buzzword. Or buzz, we don't like words, just words, applications in a corporation. In fact, as I go to pitch them to get sponsorships, I look at their sustainability and I look at their governance and their environmental outreach. And just like corporate social responsibility, CSR. But I believe for all these years that it's the businesses of the world that can help climatic concerns and can help almost every aspect of our life. Business is the big win. If they're on the page that I sent a proposal over to this big BlackRock company, the largest asset management company, and they have I think it's Lawrence Fink, CEO, who is suggesting that his companies that are within his organization that are signing up to BlackRock to manage their billions or $8 billion of dollars will give consideration to sustainably minded corporations. And he's gotten, in essence, he's gotten backlash. The media likes to jump on negativity if they can find it. And if you're looking for negativity, you can always find it. As opposed to what we think is positivity, that he's suggesting to do the right thing. But we all know that environmental concerns, to make a change environmentally, could be one, expensive, it's slow, and the real environmentalists, I'll call them, okay? I'll call them the hippies, but I'll call them the hippies just as a group of people who are sort of like into use less and be cheap, and that more is not so good. They potentially will say they're not doing it fast enough. So, and then there's the corporations that are saying they're doing it too fast, because if you change all your everything going on, you're going to spend a lot of money real quickly, and is it going to pay off? I guess it pays off if we have a world. It pays off if we have an ability to breathe. It pays off if a little kid gets some more fresh, clean water in a third world country or in the Blue Mountains of America. So that's it. That's sort of like my we're called Pause the World for Peace. And we're doing our best to pause the world for peace on September 21st, actually International Day of Peace, at 12 noon. But we always at 12 noon, whatever projects we're working on, we take a moment of silence. Ringo Starr gets up there virtually and says a moment of silence for peace. And I'm talking agriculturally wise. And actually, my aunt had a farm. My grandpa was a butcher. My other grandpa sold eggs. In little old Tarrytown, Westchester. I'm named after the farm. So Paula was my aunt, and so farming is a necessity unless we start to go. My nephew's into meatless foods. Okay, he's doing very well. He's an investment guy, and but we need more consideration. I talked for a while, but thank you very much for allowing me to. Sharif, thank you.
Thank you for your excellent contribution. Professor David Smith, I think you have a presentation.
Wow. Sharif, thank you. This was just some of the graphics that I have found of what I was talking about earlier. And these are the top trends in agritech today. And we had talked to them before with the Internet of Things, the robotics, the artificial intelligence, the use of drones, and not only drones, but the ability to begin to pull mesh networks of drones working together and sensors working together, the precise agriculture, the connected technologies, the regenerative agriculture, the controlled environmental agriculture, the data science, big data analysis, and the agribiotech. And this is just an example of some of the startups that are working in this area. And one of the trends that really surprised me as I was looking at some of the data of these top 10 trends is this is a heat map of where the startups are in that area. And you can see some of them are up in the United States where Rob lives, some are down in the California area, some up around New York in that area. But if I go over and look at Europe and Asia, and some of the large places where the heat map is actually in India. And so India, the countries around there are doing quite a bit of innovation in agritech. And this goes with your concept, Sharif, of how does it impact the startups around the world? How does it impact the entrepreneurs? How does it impact universities and colleges and the government? And you can truly see that on every continent in the world, there are startups there and innovation there. So that's part of where I want to say here. But yeah, I would like to keep going. But this is one of the trends that I think is just very important as we go forward. And Sharif, thank you for letting me make this point.
Now I request Dr. Talib Raphael. Dr. Talib, can you hear me?
You're muted.
Can you hear me now? Good. Okay.
Yes.
I just want to say something about the second question that you asked me, which I did not answer, about leadership. Agriculture has a lot to do with leadership because agriculture is a fact of life. Now, we need to eat to survive, and eating is dependent on agriculture. So innovation must go into agriculture. Now, the startups that David showed us are very important here. And India and Bangladesh are in an area of high heat and high intensity in startup. Now, young people have to recognize that, and they have to work on it to be able to advance themselves in politics and in anything else. Now, what I'm saying here is that agriculture is a fact of life, and agriculture can make countries, can destroy countries. Now, in Jordan, now, where I'm talking to you from, we don't have enough food to feed the people. We're importing everything from outside, and that's not good, because importing anything from outside drains yourself, drains your money, drains your assets, and we need to become self-dependent on the agriculture, at least on the food element. That's a very important aspect of life and a very important political aspect. So any ruler that does not provide food for his people cannot survive. I do encourage our young people to look into startup in agriculture, agro innovation, and I think that's an area that can help a lot, because technology has touched everything now, including all the traditional old ways of farming. Now, we all grew up in farms. Bob did, and the professor did, but the farms that we know them before are not similar to the farms that are there now. And the farms that are there now are using now new technologies to advance themselves. Now, that's what I want to say for the time being. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sharif. Can't hear you.
Now I request Professor
Yeah.
Rob.
Thanks. Talib makes a really good point. We certainly saw with the war in Ukraine, a lot of European countries were dependent upon Ukrainian farms to supply them with wheat, among other things. And war effectively cut off, at least for a period of time, those supplies. And it created issues with regard to allowing concessions to Russia to allow those supplies to go through. So it was problematic across the board. I do agree that a country needs to assure those three things that Bill Gates initially pointed out: clean water, adequate supply of food, and adequate supply of medicine. And food is one of those pivotal points. And do recognize that I mentioned earlier that agriculture and clean water can often be at cross purposes. It's not uncommon, and particularly in a developing country, for the groundwater to be contaminated by the poor use of chemicals on the fields, and it happens in developing worlds and developing countries as well. I mentioned my uncle dying because of bad practices. So it needs to be a conscientious, fully funded effort to assure those supplies. And as we go forward with the aspects of climate change, moving to vertical farming and hydroponics, not aquaponics. Aquaponics is the raising of fish. But which is important as well for fish farms. But hydroponics, where you're using water and controlled, almost scientific environments to grow food in high quantities. It created initially to help feed folks in space. It was that was the first time I ran into it. Was hydroponics for space exploration. Though it's often also used pretty heavily in remote areas where the food cannot be brought in and you have to grow it where you're going to consume it. Alaskan labs have used them in the past as well. And now people are growing a lot of their vegetables and stuff in their homes with hydroponics, because it allows for you to grow things in relatively small areas. And that's part of how factory farms are currently being built. There are a number of technologies that are implied, but hydroponics is one of them. But in the end, Talib's absolutely right. If you've got a hungry populace, you will likely be deposed as a leader. I think the French Revolution, at least the story was, the French Revolution was triggered by the belief that royalty did not take food seriously, and the comment that Marie Antoinette didn't make, but was attributed to her, that when people were starving, they could eat cake. Was inflammatory and was one of the things that supposedly triggered the populace to behead much of their leadership. So in the end, food's important. Food's important for survival, not only for the population, but food's important for the survival of leadership. Because if you've got hungry people, they will undoubtedly revolt at some particular point or leave. We've got a serious problem here in the Americas with folks migrating from countries because they can't get enough food, and they're not feeling particularly safe. Climate immigrants, climate refugees, I think we call them, and in the end, that's probably you lose a good chunk of your populace. Suddenly, you become non-viable as a nation. So whether they revolt or leave, you've got issues. And so keeping those people content, productive, and focused on staying where they are. People don't like to move; they don't like change. And when they have to move and have to make those changes, it's because there's some type of a dire problem that government should be addressing, and it's not. And so the climate refugees, I think, showcase fundamentally a failure in their related governments to take care of their population, and that's a problem. And so government should take this as a higher priority than it currently is. And if you can control your food supply, then if there's a war or a major climate event or a catastrophe, then you've got a much better handle on trying to mitigate the problem. Where if you're importing that stuff, you don't. Right. You're at the mercy of whatever's happening in the country that you're importing from, as we saw with Ukraine. So it is really important that food, clean water, and medicine have the highest priorities. And as I mentioned earlier, fortunately, robotics and automation are able to come in and make huge changes in regard to yields, labor, productivity, safety, and quality. And if they're applied correctly, and that stuff can be exported. If you develop a competency in these areas and do it particularly well, that manufacturing capability, that knowledge is exportable and can do positive things for your trade with other countries, so that your trade balance. So it's economically very important as well. So very important topic.
Thank you.
David Kelly, I think you're up.
I'm up? Okay.
Yeah.
I couldn't hear if anyone was saying anything except for you. So I want to make one comment. I think that aquaponics is much more sustainable than hydroponics for farming because there's a lower cost point and less you have to do in terms of water chemistry management. With aquaponics, you're managing an entire ecosystem, and as opposed to with hydroponics, it's a lot more chemistry and analysis to keep it functioning. Now, you can do that sort of thing with aquaponics, but it's less necessary. So I found that when maintaining the elements of the water chemistry for growing vegetables and vertical farms, that with the aquaponic setup where you're using aquaponics isn't necessarily driven by fish. It could be crustaceans but anyway, there's animals and plants in the system to create an entire nitrite cycle to be able to feed the plants. And that's where with a lower cost point and less technical expertise, you can maintain an aquaponic setup easier than a hydroponics.
I have a good question. So aquaponics, you're growing. You're growing them in water. You're growing food in water.
Well, they're both really growing in water usually, and it isn't necessarily growing directly in the water. There's setups like aeroponics where you're essentially misting or drip feeding, but in hydroponics, you're managing the water chemistry directly. You're having to put fertilizers and control your nitrate levels and things like that in the water, where aquaponics is you're using some sort of animal product living, like maybe you're raising fish or you're raising crustaceans or whatever it is, and the fish waste in the water, you use a biological filter of some kind or bioreactor to break that fish waste down into nitrate to feed the plants, and then you grow your plants and vegetable products using that as a source for fertilizing it. So you're creating more of a closed, complete biological cycle with aquaponics.
I have a buddy who did hydroponics. I believe he did hydroponics. And he broke the world's record and went out at sea for one. This might be the only guy that's going to know how to live on Mother Earth. 1,152 days. Reed Stowe. He broke the world's record of being out on a little 80-foot schooner that he built himself, and he had sprouts. He lived on sprouts and beans and catching fish.
Cool.
As a way of life for 3 years.
Who's that, Professor? Who's that? Again, who's that?
Reed Stowe.
Okay. Thank you.
The longest voyage, and he's working on some concept for Mars now.
Okay.
Yeah, anyway, so I'm actually doing aquaponics like right here in my office. You can't really see, but there's this up here, which is all plants out of the water. I mean, there's a fogger going on right now, which is creating fog up there. And then more plants in here with some crustaceans and fish and worms and other things. So it's a whole closed biological system. And it has everything from rotifers to freshwater shrimp and clams and things like that.
Are you saying,
David, can I ask you
to
something?
make a whole food, you can get rid of a farm? Or a place to make farm-raised fish? I'm trying to understand what's the implication of what's being done, if you don't mind me asking.
Between aquaponics?
Either one. It's
both are great. You can it's with hydroponics and aquaponics, you can put a farm in a warehouse, or you could put a farm on the side of a skyscraper, theoretically.
So countries that don't have food, is this what they should be doing?
I think so, especially if they have problems with their topsoil or they have other environmental problems. I think there is also something called permaculture, which I know less about, but where you kind of restore the natural environment. And I think where countries and different places can take advantage of these approaches is where they can restore environments where they might not have the ability to farm directly on the soil. It might be easier to create an aquaponic system that's less dependent on
Soil.
the weather, for example, or
water, rain.
Yeah.
So I think Madagascar is one of those countries, I believe, or something over there. They have the river hasn't flown in a long time, or the water hasn't come down in a long time. So why wouldn't people? Is there big companies doing this?
Not well. There's some. I wouldn't say big companies, but I wouldn't say I'm really an expert in it. I'm really more. My expertise is just in the closed management of the water chemistry. But I know, like, there's a mid-sized company in Utah that is funding a business that's doing aquaponics specifically in closed environments in a number of warehouses, and they're able to grow crops, and they take the vegetables and sell them to different markets and things like that. I know like Elon Musk's brother, I believe it is, has some kind of business doing the same sort of thing in New York, or I believe it's New York anyway. I could be wrong. Where they're basically, I believe they're using containers and putting aquaponic farms in containers, where you can put these quote unquote farms, in parking lots and things like that.
How does that work with regard to volumes, quantities?
In terms of
Volume.
volume? Yeah. It depends on the scale. You scale it to the volume you want to produce.
Okay, but because the professor asked
about. So I live on this property, and I maybe have, it's maybe 8,000 square feet of land. If I jump out my window, I would land on my neighbor. But I could grow enough food using vertical aquaponics on this property to feed my whole family.
Okay, you can do it.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
The entire nations could be benefiting from that.
Yeah, I mean,
that's what the professor was asking.
With the stuff I grow, I have to throw a lot of plants out because there's just too much.
You have too much food.
Yeah. Now, so I'm experimenting with some composting to use that to create substrate for other kinds of parts of the closed system. I know when I worked with Hall Labs, I theorized about building an aquaponic system around using cows, where you could grow an entire cheeseburger on an aquaponic system. It'd have to be like really huge, but in theory, you could have the cows and the wheat and the just everything, the tomatoes and the lettuce and your onions, and all in the same closed system.
How does that work with regard to what Rob said about having to be contaminated with cancers?
What?
Contaminated with cancers.
What's
Rob
contaminated with cancers?
The end result of this.
Why would it be contaminated with cancers?
I don't know. Rob said something like that.
Well, if you're worried about, so in those systems you can use bioreactors to break down different material. Like if you're using cow waste and that's composted and you break it down into something, and if you're going to use that in another, like a farming environment, and you're worried about, prions or some other weird disease or something being in there, you could sterilize it before you use that as fertilizer or as using that compost as a base for other, growing other stuff. And that's really where you start talking about doing this at really large scales. You're going to have to get into the whole, chemistry and managing that environment just to make sure that you don't have some weird thing growing on, or some protozoan, or some bacteria that's going to eat people's brains or something like that. It's you're still going to have to manage that and manage the pests or whatever it is. I just think that a lot of that can be done naturally without as much chemicals.
And that cancer comment is really the chemicals. With hydroponics or aquaponics, you've got a relatively closed system, and so you're dealing with pests by keeping them out of the system. To begin with, you shouldn't need to introduce poisons to kill them, and it's those pesticides that we introduce to farmings, and to a lesser extent fertilizers, are artificial manufactured fertilizers that are the carcinogens. So if you're doing aquaponics or hydroponics correctly, you shouldn't have to introduce those things into the system, and that provides a protection. It's the difference between a closed system and an open system. In an open system, you do have to introduce things to mitigate the other things that are coming into the system. With a closed system, your mitigation is keeping those things out to begin with. But with open, it's you're going to have insects flying in. You're going to have other issues that you can't control globally across the system. It's the nature of some of these closed systems is what makes them safer is you contain it. Is you have a much better chance of keeping carcinogens out than in an open system.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Absolutely.
Yeah, Paul.
What's keeping what's then? So why isn't this big time business? Why isn't this?
It is. Oh, it is. It depending areas, it's ramping. It is the whether we're talking vat grown meat, which I think you mentioned one of your relatives is involved with, but factory farms are things. Vertical farms are things. They've got a pretty good sized one in New York, I believe. The issue, of course, is if you're competing on price with more traditional farms, and depending on proximity, depending on unions, depending on the farmers tend to organize, you could have restrictions that prevent you from doing vertical farming. You've got to rezone. They use a lot less water than open farms, but they do use a lot of water compared to other things. So their zoning requirements. Your typical farmer that comes up on a regular farm, that skill set's not going to work as well. With these things, you really need to be trained in managing these automated systems, which you often don't have in a regular farm. So you've got training issues, you've got zoning issues, you've got folks that don't really like the idea of the competition. Like any new technology, it takes a while to get in place, but it's a pretty decent sized business now. Billions of dollars.
Yeah, and Paul, you're beginning to see these installed in urban environments too. So in downtown New York City, in downtown Houston, other places like that, you're seeing the agroponics go up in buildings that have been repurposed from what they were before into it.
Hmm.
It's Brooklyn.
Yep, pretty big. I've got to run. I've got a 9 o'clock hard stop. So I'll see you guys next time.
Okay, Rob. See you.
I know Hall Labs that does a lot with urban planning. They actually are working towards urban planning that includes aquaponics as part of the water management inside the water and waste management inside the city environment.
City.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And this is during, I think, also the trend. We've talked about point of view power generation. This is also a place where you can do some point of use agricultural production as well, and can work with the whole concept of creating that ecosystem with power and growing food and setting up a microenvironment. And this could also be part of that trend for microenvironments, particularly when you look at places where the logistics and others are not as good. So it is a trend that is beginning to take off a lot, but it is more small scale production that could be very beneficial, but you have a lot of them versus a large scale agricultural one where you have farmers farming on hundreds of acres.
That's right. Now, when it comes to vertical gardening, I'm an architect and an urban designer myself, and I know that a skyscraper is not a curse by itself. Skyscraper can be the worst energy generator and energy consumer. It can be the best energy producer in the world. In other words, it can work good for climate change. It can do that.
So other questions or comments about
Mr.
aquaponics,
Paul,
hydroponics, or
what's your
permaculture?
concluding?
Well, I can do my. Who do you want to do concluding remarks first?
David.
Which one?
David, go ahead. The other David.
Me, David,
Sir,
or David Smith?
No. David Smith. David Smith.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, guys, thank you. This has been a very good discussion as we hear it's going. I could keep going on this one all day long because it's so important. Because if you look all over the world, and growers are on a mission to do more with less, to produce enough food, feed, the other parts of the agribusiness to fuel the world's increasing population while really trying to control and minimize really agriculture's use of land, water, and other resources. And you're seeing major organizations, major companies beginning to step up and go into this because the food system today is at really a tipping point. There's changing consumer food preferences and eating behaviors that are fueling the shift from a commodity-driven supply chain focus in agriculture to more of a value add, more of a personalized and much more of a technology-driven agriculture ecosystem. And so what we're seeing today in this topic, Sharif, that you picked as an excellent one, that this environment is causing us to reimagine a new agro-based food system where technology enables new collaborations, new methods, new consumer demand drives the production. But equally important is sustainability and meeting the targets of the global environmental requirements and things are really coming into it. The agriculture business for years had vertical silos. And what we're seeing now is with all the data, the sensors, these technologies, the things which we've been talking about today, that shift is underway to say, we have to treat this more as a more complete ecosystem. It's not just what I'm doing on my acres of land that I'm farming. It's not just why I'm doing this. It's not what I can do in my community. I can tell you around me here in Texas, I almost don't know of a farmer of any size or a rancher of any size that isn't using satellite-based GPSs, that's not looking at satellite-based imaging, that is not I'm seeing them by drones, by the boatload. We're seeing them deploy sensors in their fields to understand the moisture content, the other content of it's going. And we're seeing their supply chain also digitized. The old agriculture supply chain was a very manual supply chain. It is now digitized, and their markets have digitized. So, Sharif, a lot of change, a lot of opportunities in this area. This is not the farming of our grandparents. This is not even the farming of our parents. This is a new generation we see coming out. And things like what David Kelly's talking about, others are going to force us to reimagine how we view farming, how we view the whole trend. We're also seeing non-animal based meats coming out. That are also there. So that is another change you see in the agribusiness, is even the livestock view is changing as we go forward. So, Sharif, what an area with tremendous innovation going on now, tremendous transformation, and really tremendous convergence from many other verticals coming to play in what had been really a fairly traditional business sector. So, Sharif, once again, thank you so much for bringing this really important topic to all your viewers.
Thank you. Dr. Talib, what's your concluding remarks?
Okay, what I want to say is I want to thank David Kelly for bringing this up And I want to thank David Smith also for summing it up in a good way. Now, the traditional way of farming is changing very quickly into this. Now, even the distance between the farmland and the urban setting is becoming closer to each other, which is very important here. Now, I'm most interested in the developing world. In the developing world, how can we maintain this to go further? How can we maintain this know-how to become more adequate to maintain some of the societies that were so dependent on traditional farming, and now they are moving into this kind of farming, this kind of eating? I want to hear Mr. David Kelly talk about this if possible, with the perspective of the developing world, because it's not just the technology that needs to be transferred. It's much more than that, I think. It's the space, it's the distance between urban space and agricultural space. It's all that of the above. And the water also. The water quality in our part of the world is very, very important. I said that before. The coming wars are not going to be about oil. They're going to be about water. So if we continue to do it in this traditional way of farming, we will not get anywhere, neither in peace nor in wartime. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Sharif, for bringing this very important topic on.
Thank
I
you.
learned a lot today.
Professor David J. Kelly, what's your concluding remarks? Yes. Mr. David, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, that might help. So let me start again. So I just want to iterate how important I think it is for us in the long run to understand how biological systems work and to be able to use that knowledge to create closed ecosystems for farming, for waste management, for all of the other reasons that we've talked about. And doing aquaponics, for example, can be done cheaply. You can everything from you can use garbage bins and a water pump, and scrap PVC pipe, and you got an aquaponics system, and then learning how to use that. You can even purify water with bioreactors and some of these things. They sound like they're really, but I mean, I could do this stuff with stuff out of the garbage, and learning how to apply entire ecosystems in closed environments to create these, whether it's food or water or both, or it's I think important for us as a species in the long run to learn how to do this and learn how to do it well. And I think that's kind of where the trend is going. I think is more and more we're seeing this kind of closed loop stuff, and it'll help us with so many parts of whether it's so many parts of what we're doing in the future. If we can use nature to in this way to provide the things that we need without damaging the environment. In fact, we can use this stuff to actually help clean the environment, like with permaculture, for example.
Improve the environment, yes.
Yeah. That's it. That's my closing remarks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now I request Mr. Paul.
My closing remark, actually, there was a question. I'm sorry, because I don't know this. Is vertical farming the same thing as agri and hydroponic? Is that considered?
It can be, yeah. It can be. Vertical farming can be hydroponics, aeroponics, or aquaponics. It's just done vertically.
Okay. All right. The largest one in the country is here in Maryland, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. Bowery, they're called. All righty. Well, thank you. As important information, I'm going to go to Bowery this afternoon, and because I'm a producer, so I want to promote what people that are doing in a good way with these an Earth Day show. Right. This is what I should be doing, and to get the word out. And just like everybody on this call here, you're all very wise people, and I thank you to be allowed in here. And I will share this actual gathering with our Good News broadcast and Pause the World for Peace, because you guys are part of the peace process, I'm going to say, for Mother Kind and Mother Earth. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining today's sessions. And World Talent Economy Forum, we are working for emerging economy. Agriculture is extremely important. Country like India, Bangladesh, Pakistan. Your dialogue will be helpful for our community. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, David Kelly.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.